Joining me this evening, we've got Mo Pickering and we've got Nathan Geering, both professionals in their own right in the audio description realm. And we all experienced this piece, Artificial Things, which was absolutely miraculous to listen to. So before we sort of get into some deep conversation, I just would like to invite Mo and Nathan to talk a little bit about why this piece was chosen for description, how this piece was chosen, a little bit around the process of that. Maybe Nathan, we'll start with you.
Okay, so this piece, it was already it already been created. It was a dance film that had already been created by Stopgap Dance Company, and they basically came to me and they said, we want to have this piece audio described, and we've heard about the Rationale Method, and we'd like it to be audio described in like a really innovative way. So I had a long conversation. I did some consultation sessions with them, and I asked them some key questions, and by me asking them these questions, I was able to identify, okay, what would be the best aesthetic to suit the production that was presented. Obviously, I'd seen the film, but I wanted to know more about the choreographers and their artistic process. So I was asking them to cast their minds back to kind of like when they were in the room, kind of like what language they were using when they were thinking about like choreographic devices. What is the whole ethos of the piece? Is there a certain energy or a certain thing that they want communicating in certain sections of the production that they really want the audience to know about? So it was all of these things that kind of like culminated in me knowing, okay, right, so the best form for this is mainly going to be a poetic and a dynamic aesthetic, and so what that means is, okay, it was going to incorporate a lot of poetic text that could evoke a lot of emotion, but as well as that, the vocal delivery had to be dynamic. So it had to have like peaks and troughs within it, and the emotional energy of the piece had to be able to be carried through and communicated through the vocal delivery. The words weren't just enough. So it was at that point that I decided that, yep, Mo's the right one for the job. I need to hook Mo up with this bad boy, and yeah, she ran with it.
And Mo, right person for the job for this. It was fantastic. I'm curious about your process because one, you're a trained audio describer, but you have a background in poetry. And so how does your background in poetry inform your description for this particular piece? And maybe for all pieces, but for this particular one.
It makes you think very carefully about your choice of lexis, how many words are repeated, or how they are used and set against each other, and how to do things very, very efficiently with language. I've also been a teacher, and when I used to teach children about poetry, I used to say, words have their friends and they hold hands with their friends. So you have to be careful which words you invite into your writing, because if you use certain words, they have positive or negative associations, or they have neighbours that tend to creep in with them. So I suppose that's how the poetry helps. Does that answer your question?
Absolutely. It gives us a really good insight. There's also, and I have the benefit of having a previous conversation with you about this, how your process worked in creating this piece. So maybe talk a little bit about your process and, for creating the description for this piece, but talk a bit about your process and how you chose to pick moments to really emphasize what the movement was all about.
The actual dance film is divided into 4 sections. So I worked through section by section, figuring out how to get early on in the description what the dancers looked like and what the location was at that moment. And once I'd set the scene, I then wanted to give a broad brushstroke feel of the type of movements that were being used, And then I would like dip down into detail every now and then for particularly interesting or quirky little steps, or ones that I felt were poignant or full of emotion or particularly relevant at that point. And it was tricky fitting everything in, but you have to be judicious about what to include and what to leave out. The last scene is very, very exuberant and joyful, and there was a lot happening, and for someone with sight, it all happens simultaneously. But of course, audio description is a linear art,
Yes.
and you have to decide which words are going to come out of your mouth first. And it was just trying and rewriting and trying again and rewriting again. It was a lot of work, but I did enjoy it.
I'm curious, this is kind of a tangent, but when a person says a lot of work, contextualize that. How many hours does it take to work on a piece like this to create description?
I actually added it up, and counting boring stuff like emails and uploading things and what have you, I think it was almost 90 hours
Yeah.
for a 25-minute film. I was shocked. I will tell you that, Amy. But I had agreed to do it, and so I would do it. My problem is I have a standard, and once I've said I'm accepting this contract, it doesn't really matter how long it's going to take me. I have to get it up to that standard, otherwise I can't. I'm not very good at letting it go.
That's like the artist's cross to bear for everything, right? Like when is it done? When do you say enough? And so I appreciate you sharing the amount of time it takes, because I think as users of audio description, sometimes we're not a part of, well, not sometimes, mostly all the time, we're not a part of that process and don't necessarily know how many hours of prep and thought and review goes into this process. So 90 hours for a 25-minute piece, it maybe obviously varies from piece to piece, but the work has sort of spoken for itself here. And I really appreciate what you've created. Nathan, I want to talk to you about, and I'm bouncing a bit back and forth here, but you're working on something called, well, you're working on lots of things, but I'd like you to just maybe talk a little bit about the rationale method, which is not something we necessarily experienced in this piece in particular, but something that I think our audiences of blind and partially sighted people will be really interesting to know. So talk a little bit about that and maybe what your background is before we get into that.
Yeah, well, so within the rationale method, it's kind of like it's an umbrella term in terms of it's like a way of going about accessibility. So for example, like what Mo did, the poetic and dynamic aesthetic, that's very much still rationale method, even though there are other audio describers that do poetic text. It's kind of like the way we go about it, and like the questions that we ask, and how closely we work with the the choreographers and the makers. It's a whole methodology that surrounds that. We have different aesthetics. So for example, we have subjective aesthetics, where pretty much we just say exactly what we see. Whether somebody's like smiling or frowning, we can just simply say something like that. We have the poetic and emotive aesthetics, which you can see through artificial things that Mo lovelyly described. And then you also have the beatboxing and vocal percussion aesthetic. And so and we give people we give clients the opportunity to mix and match between these. And what we have to be really mindful of is when we're in consultation with the directors and things, we have to be mindful of, okay, at what stage in the journey are they on their journey of access, for example. So for example, we may think that, oh, do you know what, a beatboxing and vocal percussion might be perfect for this piece. But they may be like, oh, well, actually, that's a bit too much of a departure from the type of work that I'm used to making and things. So, oh, I don't know about that for this production. I might have to place it. So we kind of like we almost have to sometimes hold their hands through through the journey, and you know, we can only go with kind of like what they're willing, the parameters that they're willing to set for their production, because obviously they've asked us to interpret their production, or make accessible their production. So we have to take that into account to a certain extent. There are some times when we're just like, well, actually, do you know what, this is going to be the best form of access, and just trust us on this. This is why you're hiring us. This is, you know, just go for it. So those are the things that we have to bear in mind within the whole journey of the Rationale method. Within the vocal percussion and beatboxing aesthetic, so my background is hip hop. I'm a b-boy, so I roll around on the floor and spin on my head. I've done that for many years, and I, you know, spoke to a lot of people who are partially sighted and people who are blind. Worked with a lot of disability organizations, and basically the Rationale method was made in consultation with people with sight loss in every step of the way. Every step of the way, we had them on board for consultation, and even within some of our productions, you know, wherever possible, we have at certain stages, we have you know, people who are partially sighted or blind giving feedback on the audio descriptions that we made so far, and then we continue on with that. I mean, a great example of that was with the Nature of Why, actually, Mo. Remember when we had the whole group come down who were partially sighted and visually impaired? They're like, oh yeah, you know, the description was brilliant. Oh, actually, we could benefit from, you know, this language. So yeah, so it is a real back and forth wherever possible, and we do have that dialogue all the way. And so within the sound effects that we create, because I came from hip hop, I was like, okay, well, what are the more audible elements of hip hop? And obviously you have emceeing and rap, but you also have beatboxing. And so what I did was I decided just to put some beatboxing sound effects to some movements. And you know, people who are partially sighted and blind were saying, do you know what, I can actually get a richer understanding of what's happening. But just by themselves, sound effects, they're just sound effects, you know, you have to give them context. So we would normally give like a couple of descriptive words, and then we'd follow through with some sound effects. And, you know, the great thing about the sound effect is, you know, you can describe a movement, like a quality of a movement, you know, quite instantaneously, you know, whereas to say, you know, she slices her hands from high to low and it takes 3 seconds. It can be quite wordy. When you go, she slices her hands through the air, you know the speed of it. You know kind of like that it's going from a higher point to a lower point and things. And so this is kind of like how the beatboxing and vocal percussion aesthetic works within productions, really.
When Nathan is directing as well, he encourages that in like the poetic and dynamic style. And it's very nice having a director who has a step back, because you're working so intensely on something. You're listening and re-listening to your own voice again and again. You can lose your bearings a little bit as to how effective you're being. And you can feel that you are being strident or you're being subdued. But Nathan would listen to a recording of something I'd done, and he would have a sort of more measured feedback of where I might need to rein it in, or where I might need to lean a bit more on that emotion, or raise my voice, or stand up and shout for that bit. It's very, very useful.
Yeah, I've got all these questions rolling around in my brain, and my mouth is sort of spitting them out the first one. You know what I mean? So we're bouncing a little bit back and forth, but it's a conversation. A couple of people at a kitchen table having some tea, right? And so a couple of things I just want to unpack about these sound effects, which is, do you find that there's any interruption with the music of a piece to have a sound effect layered on top of a description on top of music?
So generally no. But again, because if you're looking at dance movement, for example, that normally happens in a rhythmic kind of way. So the movement normally happens kind of like within keeping of a song, of a soundtrack, I guess. And so the sound effect to describe that normally will fit within the rhythmic parameters of the of the song or of the track, and it will add an extra layer to it. Really,
I'm all about layers.
yeah.
And Mo had just mentioned that you were working with you as a director of the audio description. So when we refer back to artificial things, you finding Mo to be the one who writes the description, and then you're the one who kind of the conductor, the director of the description. And you had shared a lovely story where you were talking about, maybe you were laying it on a little thick when you would say something like, "Hey, can you focus a little more on this?" Or "Can you give me a little more of this on this moment?" Or so maybe talk about the relationship between the two of you in that process of listening to the description, providing feedback, and then incorporating that feedback. Because for Mo as a describer, that's probably not something that you experience often, because you deliver the way you deliver for a stage piece, right?
Actually, no, Amy, because normally I am in a group. I live in a city called Derby in the UK, and the Derby audio describers are a group of 5 people, and we usually work 2 or 3 on a live theatre show. So one describer will do the first half, one describer will do the second half, and one person will do the admin and maybe the pre-show notes and the set descriptions and costumes and things. And I am very, very used to having my favourite phrases shot to pieces by my lovely colleagues, because I'm clipping the actor and their words, or I'm talking over an important sound effect, or I've just used that word too often in the past and the poor listener needs a bit of variation. So actually I'm used to that, but we have a set system, don't we, Nathan, where there are stages of the production. So Nathan, when we first started working together, used to ask for drafts regularly. And then I think he realised how many were flipping coming his way. And thought, I can't go with this. I think I'll just
90 hours worth.
I think I'll just trust her a bit more now. So at particular stages, I will send him finished work, our script and or audio, and Nathan will listen through and give vital feedback to say, what needs doing or what's fine. With artificial things, you probably noticed that there are song lyrics at some point. Is it Nina Simone? And I was really trying not to talk over her lyrics. So in situations like that, to answer your question, Amy, about not covering up the music or whatever, you wait until the singer is singing a very long note. So she's ending a line of song with the word me. So she'll sing me and then she'll carry that beautiful note on. But she's already kind of got the information out. So I might jump on the end of her E vowel to try and squeeze in a bit more description. But yeah, we do try and leave alone any dialogue in a play or any lyrics in a performance.
So what was the dynamic like between the two of you in this process for artificial things?
So in terms of the dynamic, was the thing is, so obviously because I've done all the initial like reconnaissance for the piece, and then gone with Mo, it's kind of like I know in my head in terms of what the potential of the piece is, and I know what Mo's full potential is. And so it's like when she hits me back with a draft, and I'm like, because she's always going to come at me with great content. She's always going to come at me with great content. So, but it's like, I'm like, yo, Mo, I need you to to smile a bit more on this. And she's like, Nathan, I am smiling. I was like, yeah, but even more. She goes, I thought I was smiling. I'm like, no, you can do it. And the thing is, like, then she hits it, and then like I get so like in the UK we say we get so gassed and we get so like excited and hyped up. So it's like when Mo hits it, I'm like, oh yeah, that's right.
Oh, moment.
Yeah. And then so it really like energizes me because it's super passionate about what we do. You know what I mean? And so because I'm like, okay, I know the audience is really gonna is really gonna connect with this. And so it's kind of like whenever I see those moments, I'm like, right, okay, Mo, hip, okay, give me more of this, or ease back a little, and then she responds to that, and you know, and then she comes back with something that kind of like blows my mind, you know, and goes beyond my expectation. And you know, that's really beautiful to see, you know, that we can have that relationship, that dynamic of, you know, just going back and forth. And we know what we're doing is we're trying to raise the level, you know, so that the service user can have the best experience possible. But
absolutely.
you know, when we're two passionate people going about it, I think it's easier to do something like that rather than when somebody's just I guess facing something that it was just a job. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. I think as somebody who listens to description, we know when it's just the job. Like we can hear that in the voice. I wonder what the dynamic was. I mean, you know, you both come from the perspective of live performance, right? And now this is a digital world that we're in. How different is that for your process or for the choices that you make? Mo, maybe you can talk to that a little bit.
I don't think it changes the fact that you really want to bring alive the emotions you can see in the piece. So whatever the film or the video is that you're working with digitally, you're still trying to transmit those same emotions. So in that sense, it doesn't really change. It makes it easier in a way that the timings are static, and you're not going to have an actor forgetting their lines one night because they're pre-recorded, and you're not going to have a dancer speeding up and choosing a completely different partner than what you expected because it's pre-recorded. But on the other hand, the camera can do close-ups and cuts and switches and pick up details that are just lovely, and you want to get everything in and you can't. And that is, it hurts, Amy. It absolutely hurts. I was gutted that I had to cut a phrase in Artificial Things. So I can tell you now, the bit where the wheelchair is dismantled, and we see Dave approaching the female dancer who's draped over the back of the frame of the chair. At that moment, there is smoke hanging in the air, and it's drifting across the back of this kind of disused warehouse type setting. I was so desperate to get that in, and in the end I thought, you know what, the smoke isn't technically a part of the dance. Something has to go. It has to be the smoke. So every now and then you just have to make decisions that are painful
choices.
But in terms of returning to the dynamic between me and lovely Nathan, I think there is only one case where I preempted a comment from Nathan, and that was during the opera. I mean, you're saying about passion. I am passionate about an audience member having a right to the same experience as a sighted audience member. And we were, and Nathan has referred to the fact that people are at different stages in their journey of understanding how much accessibility can be achieved. And because the musical director and musicians are absolutely passionate about their work, they were in the opera slightly concerned about some woman coming in and talking all over their music, because they spent ages on their violin fingering, thank you very much, and they didn't really want me describing something over the top of their music. And at one point, somebody said, oh, but look, it's an opera. The people coming want to hear the music. The music is the most important thing because it's an opera. So why do you think any description of what they can see should take precedence? Bearing in mind this is being danced to and there's mime going on and all sorts. And I just said to him, look, they are the same as us and will come for an evening out at the opera and want to talk about it with their sighted family and friends afterwards.
Yes.
And I don't think it's acceptable to have a situation where an audience member could be going home, chatting about the show, and somebody could say to them, oh, and that bit where she has the orgasm,
Right.
and the blind person doesn't know what
are you
you're talking about because that hasn't been presented to them. That's not acceptable. And he went a bit quiet after that. But the only time I preempted a comment from Nathan was when I had to do the orgasm. And I said, just, this is one situation, Nathan, just do not tell me, do it again, darling, with more feeling, because I have given it everything I am going to give it, and I don't want to revisit this at the moment.
Thank you for the anecdote, Mo. We did not experience this piece, but now I really want to experience this opera that you had described.
Oh, it's a great opera, and the disabled dancer did the orgasm stunningly. And
I can't even imagine what that directorial process was like, but that's a conversation for another platform. It's been such a joy to experience this piece, to get just a small glimpse through your lens on accessibility, around description, around this particular piece. And like I've said before, Mo, the moment you start speaking, even from the fuzzy titles that become crisp at the beginning of this piece, I'm like in it. I'm in it. So the way you hit the moments and that stuff is all really beautiful to me. So bravo to you both, Nathan, for directing those moments, and Mo for writing and hitting those moments. It really allows me as a person with low vision to be able to experience it in a way that I would not have had access to at all. So I thank you so much. I had a whole list of questions and there just isn't enough time to get to everything, but I love that you both have joined me for this little Q&A, and thank you to the both of you for everything that you do in terms of making arts more accessible for those of us who are blind and partially sighted. It's a real joy to be able to be involved in participating in arts and being a patron of the arts when it's made accessible. So thank you for that.
Thank you.
It's a pleasure. Thank you very much, Amy.
Thanks for having us, Amy.
Thank you.